The Ash Whisperer. Before we continue, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you. The call came in a little after midnight, when the city's usual hum had quieted into a heavy, restless silence. A fire had broken out in an old apartment block on Harlow Street, a narrow stretch of aging buildings and flickering streetlights. For Station 47, it was another late-night blaze in a tired neighborhood, the kind that smelled of scorched wiring and bad luck. Rookie firefighter Leo Matthews was the first to suit up. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his mask, trying to hide it from the others. This was only his fifth real call, and he still felt that anxious buzz that lived somewhere between fear and adrenaline. His captain, a broad man named Rains, slapped him on the shoulder. "Stick close to your unit, kid. No hero moves tonight." Leo nodded, though his heart was already pounding too fast to respond. The fire truck roared to life, sirens slicing through the dark. As they approached Harlow Street, the orange glow painted the skyline, flickering in the reflections of wet pavement. When they arrived, the building was a living monster, its windows pulsing with heat. The third floor was fully ablaze. Smoke billowed out of shattered glass, carrying the smell of melting paint and something else, something sour and wrong. The team moved quickly, hoses uncoiled, ladders extended, orders shouted through static and breath. Leo followed close behind his partner, Rivera, their boots thudding up the stairwell. The smoke was thick enough to feel, crawling against their gear like hands. Through the radio, someone shouted, "Victims reported on the third floor." "Move fast." They reached the landing, where visibility dropped to almost nothing. The hallway stretched into darkness, lit only by flashes of orange behind closed doors. The heat pressed against Leo's helmet, whispering and shifting. That was when he heard it. A voice, faint and trembling, crackled through his headset. "Help me. Please help me." Leo froze. "Did you hear that?" he asked Rivera. "Hear what?" "Keep moving." But the voice came again, clearer this time. "Please." "He's still burning." It sounded like a little girl. Without thinking, Leo turned toward the sound. It seemed to come from a far end of the hall, past a collapsed beam and a door barely hanging on its hinges. He pushed through, coughing as smoke filled his lungs. His radio buzzed again, Captain Rains shouting his name, but the words blurred into static. Inside the apartment, the world felt strangely still. The roar of the fire dulled into a muffled heartbeat. Soot and ash swirled in the air like snow. And there, in the corner of the room, stood a small figure. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8, her skin gray with ash, her nightgown scorched and torn. Her hair hung in clumps, and her eyes were dark pits, wet and shining in the light of his flashlight. Hey, it's okay," Leo said, moving closer. "I'm here to help you. We need to get out." The girl looked at him without moving. Then, in a voice barely louder than a breath, she whispered, "Please, my daddy's still burning." Leo turned his flashlight toward the rest of the room, expecting to see another body, but there was nothing, just the warped floorboards and blackened furniture. When he looked back, the girl had tears streaming down her face, cutting clean lines through the soot. "Come on," he said, crouching down. "We'll find him, but we have to get you outside first." She nodded weakly. He lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, almost weightless and unnaturally cold. As he carried her out, she whispered again, so close to his ear that it made him flinch. "Don't let him touch me." The stairwell seemed longer on the way down. Every step felt heavy, the building groaning under their weight. Flames licked along the walls, chasing them downward. When Leo burst through the entrance into the cold night air, the medics rushed forward. "I've got one," he gasped, laying the girl on a stretcher. "She's not breathing right." The medic hesitated, then checked for a pulse. His expression changed almost immediately. "Kid, there's nothing here." Leo blinked through the sweat and smoke. "What do you mean nothing?" "She's cold. No pulse. No respiración." "That's impossible," Leo said. "She was talking to me." But when he looked down again, his chest tightened. The stretcher was empty. Only a layer of fine gray ash remained where she had been. The rest of the night passed in a blur. They contained the fire, found no survivors, no bodies matching a young girl. The official report blamed faulty wiring and declared the structure a total loss. Captain Rains scolded Leo for breaking formation, but even he seemed unsettled. "You didn't see anyone, Matthews. The smoke messes with your head. Don't dwell on it." Leo tried not to, but he couldn't forget the way her voice had sounded inside his headset. Too clear, too human. 2 nights later, while the crew reviewed helmet cam footage for training, someone called Leo over. "You should see this." The video showed him entering the burning apartment alone. No sign of a child, no voice except his own. Yet in the background, faint but unmistakable, a whisper slid through the static. "Lao." It was her. No one spoke for a long moment. Rains finally muttered, "Might be interference," but his voice lacked conviction. After that, things changed for Leo. Every time the alarm went off, the whisper followed. Sometimes faint, sometimes right beside him. During drills, during rescues, even in the locker room. He tried turning off his radio, switching channels, replacing his headset. Nothing helped. The voice always found him. At first it said his name, soft and pleading. Then it began to ask questions. Why did you leave him? Why didn't you help? Sometimes it laughed, a hollow, broken sound that seemed to echo inside his skull. Leo stopped sleeping. He began to dream of the apartment, burning endlessly, the little girl standing in the doorway, her face melting into smoke. One evening, months later, a new call came in. Another fire, another apartment. Leo hesitated as he strapped on his gear. The others didn't notice the faint whispering that filled the truck's. The fire that never dies. The night the call came in, the air in Silver Creek was colder than usual. Frost glazed the trees that lined the dirt road leading to St. Bridget's Church, an abandoned structure that had stood untouched for nearly 50 years. The rural fire department was small, made up of volunteers who knew one another like family. When the siren wailed through the stillness of the valley, most of them assumed it was another barn fire, the kind they could douse before sunrise. But as they approached the ridge, they saw the sky pulsing with an otherworldly light. It was not red or orange, but blue, a cold, hungry shade that shimmered against the clouds. Captain Mason slowed the truck and stared. "That's no ordinary fire," he said quietly. The others fell silent. When they reached the church grounds, the flames were already consuming the steeple. They didn't roar like normal fire. They hissed and swayed, almost breathing. The sound was alive, like wind drawn through hollow bones. "Get the hoses," Mason ordered. "We drown it fast." They worked in practiced rhythm, aiming high-pressure streams at the wooden walls, but the water turned to steam before touching the flames. Ramirez, the youngest of the crew, cursed under his breath and adjusted his line. He hit the base of the church doors directly, expecting the wood to split, but instead the fire seemed to bend toward the spray, clinging to it. The blue light crawled along the hose, running down the stream of water like oil. "Kill the line," someone shouted. But by then the fire had already reached Ramirez's glove. He felt the heat crawl up his wrist like an electric current. He flung the hose aside, gasping. When he looked down, his skin was unburned, though it tingled as if thousands of needles pressed beneath the surface. The captain regrouped the team. "We're going to check for anyone inside. Ramirez, you're with me. Bring the foam unit." They forced open the side door and stepped into the nave. Inside, the blue glow rippled along the walls, illuminating carvings that hadn't been touched since the church's last mass decades earlier. The air reeked of scorched wood and something faintly metallic, like blood on hot iron. "Jesus," Mason muttered. "Look at that." Every pew was covered in markings. Not graffiti, but intricate runes, cut deep into the wood and filled with some dark residue. They spiraled and crossed in patterns that made no sense. Ramirez moved toward the altar, drawn by a low sound. It was rhythmic, like whispering, and it came from the front of the church. Smoke curled upward in thin ribbons, and as he approached, he saw a shape kneeling before the altar rail. It was a body, charred but upright, hands clasped together as if in prayer. The remnants of a robe hung from its shoulders. Its head was bowed, and between the blackened ribs, faint light pulsed like an ember. "Captain," Ramirez said, his voice shaking. "We've got one victim." Mason joined him and crouched. Must have been a squatter. The whispering grew louder, but now it sounded like words, though not in any language Ramirez recognized. He reached out and gently turned the figure over. The skull rolled back, and the eyes opened. They glowed blue. Ramirez screamed as a burst of fire erupted from the corpse's mouth, leaping straight into his face mask. The world vanished in light. When he woke, he was outside on the cold ground. The fire had finally begun to fade, but the church was gone, collapsed into its foundation. Mason and the others hovered over him, shouting. His helmet was melted, his skin blistered, but somehow he was still alive. The paramedics said it was a miracle. Weeks later, after the hospital released him, Ramirez returned to the station. His burns had healed faster than anyone expected. The doctors were puzzled by how quickly the scarring faded, leaving behind only a faint shimmer when the light hit his skin. At first, he ignored it. He told himself it was nothing. But then strange things began to happen. His reflection started to flicker in the mirror, the outline of his body glowing faintly blue under fluorescent light. When he exhaled, his breath left trails in the air, even in the heat of the engine bay. The others noticed. "Cold in here? Or is that just him?" One firefighter joked nervously. Ramirez forced a smile, but the truth was worse. He had begun to dream of the church every night. In his dreams, it was still burning, the blue fire endless and silent. He would see the charred figure kneeling before the altar, its head lifting slowly until he realized it was his own face staring back. The nightmares spread through the station. One by one, the others started waking in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, muttering fragments of scripture that made no sense when they tried to recall them. Some said they heard whispering in the walls of their dormitory, as if someone were reciting prayers backward. The equipment began to fail. Hoses ruptured without cause. Radios emitted soft voices when no one was transmitting. A faint smell of smoke lingered in the hallways, though no fires burned nearby. Ramirez stopped sleeping altogether. His body felt wrong, as if the warmth of his blood had been replaced by something colder. When he pressed his palms against the window pane, frost formed beneath them. One evening, Captain Mason found him standing alone behind the station, staring at his hands. They glowed faintly, veins lit like threads of blue glass. "Ramirez," the captain said, "you need help. We'll get you to a hospital." Ramirez turned to him, eyes dull and distant. "It's still burning, Captain. It never went out." Before Mason could reply, the air between them shimmered. A small spark, blue and silent, flickered to life in Ramirez's palm. He watched in horror as it spread, crawling up the firefighter's arm like a serpent. Ramirez didn't scream. He only whispered, "It's calling." Within seconds, the flames consumed him, but instead of spreading outward, they folded inward, vanishing into the air with a faint hiss. When the captain blinked, Ramirez was gone. Only a ring of blue ash remained, cold to the touch. The department shut down soon after. No one wanted to stay in a building where whispers echoed through the pipes and strange frost formed on the windows at night. Months later, a demolition crew arrived at the site of the old church to clear the ruins. They found that the ground beneath the foundation had collapsed into a pit. At the bottom was a layer of fine blue ash that gave off no heat but shimmered faintly, even under the weak winter sun. No plants would grow there. Animals avoided it. And sometimes if you stood too close, you could hear it breathing, soft and slow, like a fire waiting for air. Smoke Eater. The city had not seen blue sky in years. The factories that built its wealth had long since become its curse, leaking toxins into the air until every sunrise was a dim orange through a haze of chemical mist. The fire department was always busy, always tired, and always short on time. When the department received new equipment, everyone hoped it might make things better. The engineers from a private defense contractor arrived one afternoon with shiny steel cases and wide smiles. They unveiled the new technology like prophets with a miracle, an experimental rebreather that could filter toxic smoke at the molecular level. They said it would let firefighters breathe freely even in the thickest haze. No more bulky oxygen tanks, no more heavy hoses trailing behind. Firefighter Dana Holt was among the first to volunteer for the trial. She had been with the department for 8 years and had seen too many friends coughing up black sludge after long shifts. She strapped the rebreather to her mask and felt the air slide through her lungs like cool water. For the first time in months, she didn't choke on soot. The first few weeks went perfectly. Fires that used to choke the crews now felt manageable. The new rebreathers hissed quietly as they worked, filtering air so clean it tasted sharp and metallic. Dana felt stronger than ever. Then came the night of the chemical plant explosion. The blast shook half the city. The sky turned white for an instant and then collapsed into a black column of smoke that reached higher than any building. By the time Dana's crew arrived, the entire eastern sector of the plant was burning. Fluorescent liquids ran down the street like molten veins. Captain Reyes barked orders through the radio. Team 2, breach from the west. Hold, take your line and sweep for survivors. Dana moved through the entrance, her flashlight cutting through a haze so thick it felt alive. Her rebreather hissed softly with every breath. The flames around her flickered green and purple, chemical and wrong. At first, it felt like any other fire. Then, deep in the structure, she felt it, a pulse. The air seemed to ripple against her chest, moving in time with her heartbeat. She tried to ignore it, but it grew stronger. The smoke felt heavier now, pressing into her, swirling around her face. "Captain," she said over the radio, "I think the fire's reacting. It's not spreading right." Her voice trembled, but before Reyes could respond, the ceiling groaned. A wall of fire collapsed behind her. She ducked, felt heat slide across her helmet, and inhaled sharply. Something entered her lungs that was not air. It was cold at first, then warm, and then it began to move. She stumbled out of the building hours later, her rebreather still intact, but her eyes wide and unfocused. They said she'd been inside far longer than she should have survived. For days afterward, Dana could not shake the sensation that something was inside her. When she coughed, soot came out in perfect patterns. Rings, spirals, shapes that looked almost like symbols. The medics blamed stress. The scientists who built the rebreathers said it was residue from chemical smoke. But the feeling grew worse. One morning, Dana woke to find her breath gone. She tried to exhale, but no air came out. She could still breathe in deep, endless pulls, but nothing left her lungs. She didn't suffocate. Instead, she felt full. Her body hummed with quiet heat. When she reported to the station, her crewmates stared. Her skin looked pale and stretched tight, veins dark beneath the surface like threads of coal. Her eyes glowed faintly in low light. "Maybe you should take a few days off," Captain Reyes told her, but Dana refused. "I feel fine," she said. "Better than fine." A week later, another fire broke out, an apartment complex near the docks. The team arrived to find the building a roaring inferno. Dana went in first. Her mask was broken, the rebreather unit hanging loose, but she didn't seem to notice. Inside, her partner Miller followed her through the burning stairwell. Through the smoke, he saw her stop and lift her face toward the ceiling. The flames bent toward her, drawn as if by wind. Miller froze. She inhaled. The fire moved. It streamed toward her like water poured into a drain, vanishing into her mouth and chest. The temperature dropped. The flames along the walls flickered and died. In their place, the air turned black and silent. "Dada!" Miller shouted, but she turned slowly, her eyes burning red like embers. He stumbled backward, tripping over a fallen beam. When he looked up again, she was gone. Outside, the fire collapsed in on itself, extinguishing without explanation. No one ever found Dana Holt. The department searched for 2 days before declaring her lost in the blaze. For weeks after, strange reports came in. Fires started and died on their own. Witnesses described a figure walking through the smoke, moving like a shadow. Some said it was a woman, her skin blistered and black, her eyes glowing faintly through the haze. The department tried to ignore the rumors, but they could not explain the equipment failures that followed. Rebreathers shorted out without warning. Tanks leaked. Radios picked up soft breathing in empty rooms. Miller started having nightmares. In them, he stood inside a burning building, unable to move, while a voice whispered behind him. "Breathe," it said. "Breathe me in." The city kept burning. Every week, new fires erupted, more violent than the last. And every time, someone swore they saw her. One night, a warehouse near the river went up in flames. Captain Reyes himself led the crew in, determined to prove the stories wrong. The fire glowed deep red, heavy and quiet. Inside, the heat was unbearable. His men followed close behind, shouting over the roar. Then the sound stopped. The flames folded inward, shrinking to a narrow corridor of darkness. At the far end stood Dana. Her gear was gone. Her skin gleamed like cold dust. "Dana," Reyes whispered, "we can help you." She smiled, and the glow in her eyes pulsed brighter. "You already did," she said. "You made me breathe." The captain reached for her, but the air between them caught fire. Blue-white light filled the room, and when it cleared, the warehouse was gone. Only a crater remained, filled with smoldering ash that did not cool. Since then, every firefighter in the city knows the legend. They say when you enter a burning building and feel the heat shift, you must leave immediately. If you stay, you might see her in the smoke, watching with ember eyes. And if she breathes in, you will not breathe out again.